Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. The meeting of the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure will now come to order. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblyman Levitt. Assemblyman Miller.
Present.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
He'll be here shortly. He's
Assemblyman Yeager.
Here.
Chairman Ro Moreno.
And I am here. I believe Assemblyman Levitt has been able to join us, and will you mark all other members present when they arrive? I'd like to welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. Today we have 3 presentations from various organizations, including the Bureau of Consumer Protection from the Attorney General's Office, the Nevada Taxi Cab Authority, and the Western States Petroleum Association. Before we get started with our agenda, however, I'd like to go over the procedures for our virtual meetings. The legislative building remains closed to the public, and so all committee meetings will be held virtually. Committee members, staff, and everyone else will be participating either through Zoom or by telephone. For committee members, if you could please remember to silence your phones during the meeting and mute your microphones while you are not speaking to minimize background noise. Please leave your cameras on so that we can maintain a quorum throughout our meeting today. And please state your name for the record every time you unmute your mic to speak. This helps with the accurate records for our meeting minutes. Members of the public who wish to testify or present public comment will have the option to call in or submit written testimony or comments. This can be done online at the page for today's meeting on Nellis, which is located on the legislature's website. In the same place you will find today's agenda. Members of the public have the option to submit your opinion on bills online and to sign up to participate during the public comment period at the end of today's meeting. All the materials submitted for a meeting will be posted on the committee's legislative webpage. The meeting can be viewed through our streaming service or our YouTube page, our YouTube channel, both of which can be accessed on the legislature's website. If you have missed a meeting and would like to know what happened, all of our committee meetings are recorded and posted on the website, usually by the next day. Anyone who would like to receive electronic notifications of the committee's agendas, our minutes, can do so by signing up on the website or by contacting the committee manager. She is available by email. The email address is asm.gi@asm.state.nv.us. And as always, if you need help or have questions, please do not hesitate to contact our committee staff. We are always available by email. That address also appears on our committee page on Nellis. And so with that, let's move on to our first presentation of the day. We will welcome Mr. Ernest Figueroa, who is a consumer advocate at the Bureau of Consumer Protection within the Office of the Attorney General's Office. Mr. Figueroa, if you are in the room, you have the floor. And Madam Secretary, I will note that Assemblyman Wheeler has joined us.
Good afternoon, everybody. For the record, my name is Ernest Figueroa. I am currently the Nevada Consumer Advocate. Just a brief history about a little biography shortcutted by myself. I have been with the Office of the Attorney General since 2001. And in fact, this week marks my 20th anniversary with the state and with the office. And during those past 20 years, I've worked primarily in the Bureau of Consumer Protection, practicing in areas of deceptive trade, unfair trade practices, and utility regulation. And with that being said, had it not been for COVID and pandemic, I would have met some of you through the meet a legislator process in Carson City. So nice to meet all of you, and congratulations on all of you on your elections. With that being said, I do have a presentation for you. So Madam Chair, with your permission, I'd like to exercise the share screen option.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So hopefully you can see my screen and you can hear me. But a brief history of the Office of the Consumer Advocate for Public Utility Consumers. Over the years, some of you may not remember, but I certainly remember in my youth, there was a lot of energy issues going around in the early 1970s. There was talks about oil embargoes, and a lot of people were just frustrated with increases in rates and things of that nature. So over the years, in the United States, there was a movement across the United States to establish consumer advocate offices to advocate on behalf of residential ratepayers at the Public Utilities Commissions before Nevada. And a similar situation took place here in the state. And in 1981, the office was known as the Office of Consumer Advocate for Ratepayers of Public Utilities. Now, Nevada is unique. As I said before, there's a lot of offices across the nation that have utility consumer advocates, but we're unique in the sense that the office is actually housed in the Nevada Attorney General's office. And if for reference on my slideshow, you can see the different states that have the consumer advocate offices in the AG. And in other places, it's located in the Public Utilities Commission, and other places, it's an arm of the executive branch in some way, shape, or form. The authority for my office is contained currently in NRS 228, along with the Attorney General statutory authority. What's interesting to note, in 1997 was Nevada's first foray in attempt to deregulate the state. And at that time, the consumer advocate, Fred Schmidt, either sponsored legislation or had legislation passed, or Nevada passed legislation to expand the Office of the Consumer Advocate and basically move the deceptive trade practice enforcement and the antitrust enforcement into one cohesive unit, so that in the event the state was deregulated, that the office could then look at the deregulated entities under all powers of the Attorney General. So my office was broadened, and it provided us a lot of power. So one of the also by statute, here's just a brief background of what the requirements are to be the utilities consumer advocate. And it's mostly utility regulatory related, but obviously you have to be knowledgeable in the various areas of regulated public utilities, have to be independent with no interest in any publicly regulated utility or industry. The consumer advocate is not allowed to hold any other office for profit, maintain any other job, and must not be a member of any political convention or a member of any committee of any political party. A lot of this presentation is geared towards our utility side of the house. And with regards to our utility side of the house, the BCP and the consumer advocate has 12 budgeted and staff positions dedicated to protecting the interest of ratepayers. And they're housed, some of our employees are housed in Carson, are in Carson City, and the rest are in Las Vegas. These employees are entirely funded by mill assessment that is built into all Nevada's consumer utility bills. It's exactly the same mechanism how the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada is also funded. It's important to note that besides attorneys, I have accountants, economists, and engineers on staff to help me vet utility applications. And then finally, I also have the authority to hire outside consultants and regulatory experts in the necessity if I ever have to intervene in a Public Utilities Commission matter where I don't have the internal in-house expertise. Another important thing to note is the jurisdiction of the consumer advocate. I have the authority to participate in any proceeding before the PUCN involving a public utility. And obviously there's some cases that there are some exemptions that make entire sense. Railroads, utility cooperatives, and certain criminal proceedings in the event that there's some criminal proceedings that involve a public utility. It's kind of an esoteric area. It also provides me the authority to participate in any matter before any board, commission, or agency which could have been brought before the PUCN. And the most important part there is the office has in the past and most recently have been involved in certain FERC proceedings to try to protect the interest of Nevada ratepayers at the federal level, and with some success. The statutes also require that I have to intervene in all general rate cases of an electric utility. I have to intervene in any deferred energy accounting proceeding for any electric utility. I have to intervene in any, and this is kind of an esoteric area. It was this last provision was put in the event of deregulation, but any proceeding brought by an electric utility to dispose of its generating assets. And then in addition, and this is a part that sometimes utilities seem to forget, but I also have the same authority as the Public Utilities Commission to subpoena the records, exactly the same authority that the PUCN has. The next part of the slide, you can see I also can intervene in rate cases of natural gas and larger water utilities. I can intervene in integrated resource plans for the electric and water utilities. And I can intervene in cases involving the 704B exits that were happening a lot in the past number of years. And I also participate in rulemakings before the Public Utilities Commission. And it's important to note that while the statute gives me discretion, generally my office has made an attempt to try to intervene in these permissive cases if and when they are before the Public Utilities Commission. And part of the mission of the BCP, besides representing the public ratepayers, as I said before, we also enforce the Deceptive Trade Practice Statute, which is contained in NRS 598. We also enforce our antitrust statute, which is contained in NRS 598A. And we also participate in consumer outreach and education. Some recent examples of some successes that we've had as a unit as a whole. We've secured settlements with companies that have violated our Nevada Deceptive Trade Practices Act over the past 2 years. And some representative actions include a recent one with NationStar, a mortgage loan servicer that was recently announced. We secured a settlement with Apple concerning misrepresentations regarding changes to its operating system and depletions of people's batteries. I think the hottest settlement had to do with airbags, and the one that I'm really fond of was student loan forgiveness from IT ITT Tech when it was located here in the state of Nevada. We also participated in various data breach settlements. Over the past number of years, there's been a significant number of data breaches throughout the United States. And you can see Home Depot, Anthem, Community Health Systems, Sabre Hospitality Solutions have all, we've entered into agreements with them to basically to implement enforceable agreements to prevent these types of data breaches from happening again, and to make sure that these companies are doing everything that they can to protect our sensitive private information that they possess. Most recently, during the summer, Attorney General Ford tasked the Bureau of Consumer Protection to process and resolve consumer complaints pertaining to the eviction moratorium in Nevada during the pandemic. And then also the BCP played an integral part in the last general rate case that Nevada Power filed, which resulted in a refund to $120 million to the Southern Nevada ratepayers in 2020. And then finally, we also still are a standing member of the National Associations of Attorneys General Foreclosure Working Group. As a result of Catherine Masto's efforts, we meet and convene on a regular basis and talk about foreclosure prevention activities with our sister states. And then finally, as I said before, we've part of our duties is to do consumer education and outreach, and we have partnered both with the BBB and AARP and do various scam awareness prevention presentations throughout the year. And some examples of our efforts in a public utilities case. Recently the power company has filed numerous integrated resource plan amendments. When these applications come through the Public Utilities Commission, as I said before, I permissively intervene in these cases. I assign a team of experts, whether they be accountants, engineers, economists. We vet the applications to make sure that the utility has dotted their I's and crossed their T's. For those attorneys in the audience, when it says DRs, those are data requests, which are similar to requests for production and interrogatories. So for one case, as you can see, we issued 158 separate data requests, and then we analyze the information, we prepare testimony, and we take position in front of the PUCN, and then the utility has the right and duty to do the same thing to us. So we responded to 3 data requests from the utilities in the IRP. Representative of the Nevada Power rate case, the one that resulted in a $120 million refund, the BCP issued 146 data requests from our various consultants and experts, basically analyzing their financial records, their engineering records, their accounting records, and things of that nature to make sure that ratepayers are being protected. And then similarly, in the Southwest Gas general rate case that was filed in 2018, the BCP issued 166 data requests and responded to 1 data request set. One of the things that I like to talk about, and it's probably pretty relevant today, is how important electricity and energy is for consumers as a whole. Sometimes we tend to forget that modern life, electricity is a necessary commodity. You need it to pump water. You need it to cool down your air. All sorts of things are done with electricity. So it's pretty, it's pretty a modern necessity for modern day life. And in fact, in 1978, even though that's almost 40 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court found that utility service is a necessity of modern life, and that discontinuous utility service may threaten public health and safety. As we're witnessing our sister state, Texas, there's some issues going on there, and everyone's seeing the after effects of what happens when people lose energy and power. And we have some special considerations for the state of Nevada. Because we're a large state separated by many miles. Southern Nevada ratepayers, for those who live in Southern Nevada, know that your electricity bill goes up when the summer hits, and vice versa. For Northern Nevada, people's energy costs increase when during the cold months. So it's kind of an interesting interesting note. What's even more interesting or something to consider is in Southern Nevada during the summer months when people have no choice but to turn their air conditioner on, is that because, pre-pandemic, we were a 24-hour town and people work different shifts. A lot of our ratepayers literally have no control of when they're home and when they're going to turn on their air conditioner, depending on whether they work the swing shift, the graveyard shift, or a regular shift. It all varies from time to time. So it's very important that you keep that in mind. Here's some ratepayer statistics that you probably heard already if you had presentations from the electric utilities. So I won't spend too much time on them, but it's just worth to note that there are over 1.1 million electric residential ratepayers in Nevada, 800 in the south and 300 in the north. And, the average daily temperature in Las Vegas reaches 140 degrees. Obviously, those in Southern Nevada know this very well. I used to live there for 7 years, and now I live in Northern Nevada. So now I know that Northern Nevada is very cold. And then just in 2015, the average single-family residential bill was around $242. I know these statistics are a little stale. I was making an attempt to try to get them updated, but I wasn't able to do so in time for this presentation. Other things to consider, according to an Inside Energy article, and again, I find this very interesting, low-income households, and that's defined by below 50% of the federal poverty level. In Washoe County, they spend, roughly almost 18% of their income on energy. And in Clark County, that's almost 7.2% of their income on energy. And then several years ago, and I have a citation at the end of this presentation, but several years ago, Nevada Energy did a low income study. And these are some of the things that they had found, that 28.4% of low-income persons found it very difficult to pay their bills over the last 12 months, and 16.6 individuals pay most of all their utility bills late. Obviously, this is when they did the study, this was done several years ago. This does not take into account any COVID-related issues, but it's still significant to show. And then another important point that I like to cite to is AARP did a study and found that utility rates are very important to people, but sometimes they can get so high that it causes a lot of ratepayers to choose between food, medicine, and have even caused foreclosure. And again, a citation to the AARP studies at the end of my presentation. Again, some of the same articles basically saying that energy rates have a cascading effect on vital living expenses, health and safety issues, things of that nature. Unaffordable electric bills, can pose a health and safety issue for the elderly, medically challenged, especially, those in Southern Nevada due to our hot weather. And then another thing, and this is also contained in the AARP study, is that excessive utility cost, is one of the largest costs that elderly people face, and it causes a lot of a burden to people if they're excessive and unaffordable. So, first of all, I just want to say, thank you for allowing me the opportunity. I consider it a great honor to allow me to do this short and brief presentation to the People's House. You as the policymakers, I ask that you consider these things as you consider energy legislation this session. one of the things that, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, is there a problem with the current mechanism and or solution that needs to be considered? As I said before, when these types of cases, when energy cases are presented for the Public Utilities Commission in Nevada, they're vetted by our expert accountants, our expert engineers. We issue these data requests, and it's not just the Bureau of Consumer Protection, it's also the PUC and staff and other large interveners who have a stake in the game. So there's a lot of activity that goes on before the Public Utilities Commission. So, and by the same token, our statutes, our energy statutes contained in NRS 703 and 704 have evolved over 100 years and basically contain things that empower the Public Utilities Commission, and I call them consumer protections, empower the Public Utilities Commissions to consider and allow me to make the arguments that certain things that the utility is seeking are not just reasonable or will cause rate shock or basically cause rate shock and prevent the Public Utilities Commission from establishing just and reasonable rates. And then the second thing I want you to consider as you analyze legislation is, are the utilities trying to undermine a certain consumer protection that's embedded in statute and case law? Some of the things I mentioned before was just and reasonable, prudency, rate shock is a concept that the PUCN can consider. And then finally, how much will this legislation cost, and who will pay for it? Keeping in mind all the vulnerable populations that I mentioned before. There's at the end of the day, and I don't envy you in your position as policymakers, but at the end of the day, when a piece of energy legislation comes through, there's obviously some potential cost associated with it. And what's interesting to note about that is this is one of the few committees where costs is and its effects are not considered by a monetary committee. Other policy recommendations have to go before a finance committee. Energy legislation, once it's passed, and it has an impact on rates once the legislation is authorized. With that being said, I was going to have a team with me, but having seen and the difficulties of coordinating with three separate people with three different computers in three separate places, I opted to do the presentation myself. But during this legislative session, I'm going to have the assistance of Mark Kruger. He's a chief deputy in my unit. Whitney Digesti is also a senior deputy attorney general who'll be assisting me. And then Mike Roberson is a utility analyst who will also be assisting me in any utility legislative matters during the session. So with that being said, thank you for the opportunity. Here's the citations to my data. And that being said, I'm open to any questions that the committee may have of me.
Thank you, Mr. Figueroa, and happy anniversary.
Thank you.
I know we have a few members with questions, and I have a few. If they don't ask the questions, that's in my mind. So I'm going to start with Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you, Mr. Figueroa. I know we've worked together over the past and really appreciate the scope of activities that the Bureau takes on. And particularly, I think within this committee, we look at some of the utility oversight and consumer protection, but there is a lot of work that you do across spheres to protect consumers in this state, and I appreciate it. I'm going to sound like a broken record to some of my fellow members here, but we've gotten some presentations from other agencies in this and other committees, and we heard here from the Public Utilities Commission and the Department of Transportation about some of their efforts to address climate change and incorporate that into the planning and activities of their agencies. So my question is, I guess, first of all, does the Bureau of Consumer Protection consider the effects of climate change in its activities and in the positions that it takes at the Public Utilities Commission?
Ernest Figueroa for the record. Great question, Mr. Watson. Thank you for the acknowledgement of the efforts that the BCP does. But in answer to your question, the short answer is yes. We do take into account climate change in our arguments that we present before the Public Utilities Commission. You know, I'm in a little different situation in the PUCN with regards to regulated utility matters. I view my job as to present arguments for the public utility, for the PUCN to consider. And ultimately, it's the PUCN that has to basically take all the input from all the interveners, myself included, and then parse and figure out what's best in the public interest and ultimately what would result in just and reasonable rates.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And I don't really have a follow-up question. You answered it, and I'm just glad to hear and hope you continue to look at that in the arguments that you put forward and the BCP's participation in this process, because as we both know, the long-term costs of not taking action on climate, both financial, health, and otherwise, are going to be borne by consumers, particularly lower income consumers and consumers of color who you've been fighting for in other realms. So I'm glad to hear that the Bureau is factoring that into the arguments that they're putting forward, and hope to see that continue and grow. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we have Assemblyman Niagara next.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Figueroa, for your presentation. You know, during this pandemic, I've noticed a couple of things in my own life, and I would assume that this applies to a lot of people, and particularly Southern Nevada. My utility bills were definitely higher because I was spending more time at home and not at the office. So, you know, I was spending a lot of extra money to cool my residence, and then my telecommunications use, particularly my devices, internet. I think that's probably a common occurrence for people who are using a lot more data during the pandemic. So I'm just wondering if those two things had any sort of impact in what you guys are doing. I mean, I know normally you're waiting for you know, regulatory agencies to act in some way, and then you're going to intervene and make arguments for consumers. But I wondered if that had any impact on what you're doing, or if you had any observations on those two facts, if indeed they are true statewide.
Ernest Figueroa for the record. Thank you for the question, Mr. Yeager. Yes, in fact, you know, not mentioned in, you know, it's unfortunate that I condensed everything with just the data request, but, you know, each and every case that was presented before the Public Utilities Commission, you know, as everyone knows, it's had a traumatic effect on our economy, on people's employment, and things of that nature. And, you know, as I said before, my job is to put forth arguments before the Public Utilities Commission, and any instance where there was a potential for increase in rates, because as you mentioned before, people have no choice but to be at home, and the, you know, additional costs that would have been offloaded to, you know, your place of employment, for example, you're absorbing those costs because you weren't expected to be home. But anyways, with that being said, any place where there's a potential for increase in rates, no matter what, we also put forth information and arguments for the PUCN to consider to take into account the effects of COVID that it's had on the economy and people being out of work and things of that nature. So yes, we will continue to do so. You know, one of it may seem sometimes when I participate in these utility dockets that, hey, look at the weird position the consumer advocate's taking or whatever, but as you said before, my job is to put forth these arguments, no matter, as long as I put forth good faith arguments for the PUCN to consider. The PUCN, those three commissioners have a difficult job basically parsing all the information and trying to come out with an outcome that's just and reasonable for everybody under the sun. As far as I'm concerned, I feel that my duty is fulfilled as long as I put forth these arguments, regardless if I win or lose.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Peters.
And thank you for the presentation. And I think the work you do is so important to the state and to addressing equity needs. My question has to do, though, with your interface with the public and what that process looks like, how frequently you solicit public input on your whatever situation that you're looking at arguing, and how you get some of that public input in order to be the voice of the public.
Ernest Figueroa for the record. Thank you for the question. With regards to utility related matters, most of the dockets that either have an impact to ratepayers in general, there are what's called mandatory consumer sessions. And that's where our ratepayers come forth and have the opportunity to voice their personal opinions as to a certain proceeding before the Public Utilities Commission. In addition to those specific consumer sessions, which the BCP participates in addition to those, the PUCN also holds annual general consumer sessions where the public is allowed to provide input on anything within the regulated space before the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada. And as a frequent intervener before the PUCN, we are at all consumer sessions. We send staff there to take notes, to interface with any ratepayer that shows up and complains. We often, in addition to the PUCN, we also interface with the public at those events, and that's our primary source for input to help shape our arguments before the Public Utilities Commission. And I hope I answer your question.
Yes, on a larger scale, but I would like to maybe dive into, so if I as a ratepayer had a concern or identified an issue that I thought needed some advocacy, do you have a method for me to reach out to you to talk about that issue? And what is that always consumer driven rather than your office driven? Because it sounds like most of the meetings are solicited by the PUCN themselves for public input. So.
Ernest Figueroa for the record. Thank you. Let me just preface this by saying that, I hate to speak in generalities, but in this instance, probably is the best. When at the end of the day, most people have an issue with their bill and the regulated utility. The PUCN, as I like to call it, is the first responder. In those instances, they actually man a constituent response unit specifically to help mediate between the ratepayer and the public regulated utility. We do interface on a regular basis with the PUCN and their constituent response services. Oftentimes, if there's an issue that isn't not that situation that I described, but it's something different, they know to reach out and they direct them to the BCP if there's a specific issue that wants to be, that's concerning to somebody. Over the years we've had very sophisticated ratepayers bring forth issues that they see in dockets to the BCP, and there's so what I'm trying to say is, yes, we do take those, we can take those. We do have a mechanism in the Attorney General's office by which to get complaints routed to the BCP that are referenced that reference utility related matters. We also have established contacts with our congressional offices and federal representatives, to the extent that they have a utility related matter that needs to be brought to our attention. We interface with them. So there's all different ways we get this information. We get it from the PUCN, we get it from elected officials, and we get it directly from our AG complaint website. So there is a mechanism by which people can complain, and yes.
All right, thank you for your answer.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you very much for your very detailed presentation. My question is really, I think, a follow-up on my colleague. And really it's about how are we getting to consumers so that they know that you're there. And the question that I have posed to a number of our presenters over the course of the last week or so has been really relative to the multiple languages. Are you presenting information to people who are not primarily English speaking? Is there accessibility? How are we reaching those underserved populations? Now, I noted in your presentation on slide 9 in particular that you partner specifically with the Better Business Bureau and AARP. So we know that you're reaching the 345,000 members, as was quoted the other day, by our AARP representative. But how are we reaching then the broader based population so that they know you're there?
Ernest Figueroa for the record. And this is where it's nice to have had this comprehensive unit that was established in 1997. As part of our efforts enforcing our deceptive trade practice statute, we do a lot of outreach concerning scams and such related things. We formed partnerships with our legal aids. We formed partnerships with, as I said before, the BBB, AARP, the PUCN. We formed all these partnerships that we leverage to help get the word out of who we are, how we can help not just utility consumers, but consumers as a whole. We made efforts to alter our AG complaint forms that are on our website to accommodate multiple languages, and through the Attorney General's Home Again program that was related to the mortgage crisis of 2008 that's still in existence. We've created a number of publications dealing with certain events and scams that have touched different types of communities, like the issue of notarios, for example. We made I think we made an attempt to get that information either translated in multiple different languages, not just Spanish, but we reached out to different minority communities and associations for that assistance. I believe we even had free assistance from some kind individuals who provided that to our office. So, while we've done these things, I'm sure that we could do better. And frankly, we should do better. We could do it better, but it's a difficult thing. So we try. It's on our radar, but I know we could do better.
Members, any other questions? Okay, the question that I had was asked by one of our members, so see no other questions from our our committee members, I would like to thank you, Mr. Figueroa, for joining us today for your presentation, and wish you a wonderful remainder of your day.
Thank you very much.
So next, I'd like to welcome Scott Whitmore, who is the administrator for the Nevada Taxi Cab Authority, and who will provide us with an overview of their agency. Mr. Whitmore, the floor is yours if you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Watts, distinguished members of the committee. For the record, my name is Scott Whitmore, and I'm the administrator here at the Nevada Taxi Cab Authority. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to present to this committee. I will be judicious with your time. I've got a presentation here. I'm going to go hopefully not too fast, but please make a note, and I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions at the end. There are some interesting policy questions here. So Madam Chair, without further ado, if you please, I'll go ahead and start that presentation.
Yes, please. Thank you.
And again, Scott Whitmore for the record. Madam Chair, I just want to make sure, can the members of the committee see this and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So again, Scott Whitmore for the record with the Nevada Taxi Cab Authority. This is my now third legislative session, so I've had the opportunity to meet some of you in person. This is my second legislative session here with the Nevada Taxi Cab Authority. And again, I do greatly appreciate the time always to present to this committee. You guys have such an interesting range of topics to cover, transportation being one of them. So about regulated taxi cabs in Clark County. So the mission of the Taxi Cab Authority is to provide for the safety, comfort, and convenience of the taxi riding public through the regulation of the taxi cab industry. When you think of the Taxi Cab Authority, it is my fervent wish that you would think of us as public safety. That is our chief and primary mission. We regulate 16 certificated companies. With those companies, 3,530 medallions. Las Vegas works a little bit different than what you might think of when you think of other taxi cab medallions that are owned by the driver. These medallions are actually allocated by the Taxi Cab Authority board to those 16 certificated companies. So they're not owned individually by the drivers. Those are the currently approved number of vehicles on the road. We exist to provide uniform rates, fees, and charges to the public. We do annual inspections of vehicles, and we have 6,000 vetted drivers who have to go through an FBI fingerprint background, which is their federal database, obviously, and then a local background scope law enforcement background check. So again, our three primary public safety functions. So number one, we vet every driver. So that's a local and federal criminal background check. We inspect every single vehicle annually. We also have periodic investigations and inspections of vehicles, whether they're changes to the car, putting new meters in, you name it, we're there to inspect that vehicle. And then third, we have our routine patrol and our targeted enforcement by post-certified peace officers. So just quickly, why do we have regulations for taxi cabs? What was the rationale originally? And you can see some great throwback pictures there of Las Vegas. The Taxi Cab Authority has been here since 1969. So I believe that's 52 years. So taxi regulations exist across the United States, and these are broad buckets, but it prevents every single person basically with a phone in a car from running out and offering taxi service. And the regulations were created because one, prevented economic collapse. It prevents unvetted drivers and cars on the road. Like I said, we're inspecting every car, we're vetting every driver. And importantly, it prevents congestion, and we're going to talk about that. Taxi regulations also exist to provide for uniform rates and fees, and it prevents a race to the bottom. So that idea of economic collapse, if one of our bigger groups, our ownership groups, decided they were going to set their own amount and say they're going to charge 10 cents a mile and somebody else is charging 25 cents, you create a race to the bottom where it's not economically viable, and you're just pushing smaller competitors out. So these are the larger regulatory issues as to why and how taxis have been regulated throughout the United States. And then obviously we exist to ensure the safety, certainty, and sustainability of service. So traffic, let's just talk about that in Clark County and specifically on the Las Vegas Strip. This is a big issue. Every minute that a visitor spends stuck in congested traffic is a minute that they are likely unhappy. They don't know what their final fare is going to be, and it's costing our resorts money. So these are significant issues on a Friday, Saturday night. Now, obviously, this is wishful thinking, right? This is towards the future, and this is our past of post COVID pandemic. But congestion is a very real issue on the Las Vegas Strip. So as I said, there's 3,530 approved taxis. And I want to be very clear about this point, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am not anti-Uber and Lyft. My staff is not anti-Uber and Lyft. This is merely a juxtaposition between the taxis that have been allocated and what's currently on the road in terms of rideshare. So there's 15,000 estimated rideshare active cars in Clark County right now. Pre-COVID, that estimate was 30,000 plus. So today you're looking at 4x the number of taxis that could be on the road. Pre-COVID, it's about 8.5 times the amount of taxis that could be on the road. So some of the headlines that what this agency was so focused on had to do with long hauling citations. And maybe that's something that you remember about taxis and the TA. And these are just incredible headlines. Ever get the feeling Las Vegas cab industry is long hauling regulators? From the Reno Gazette-Journal, signs at Vegas airport aim to curb taxi long hauling. From Time Magazine, this was a national story. There's just no stopping Las Vegas taxi drivers from overcharging tourists. I mean, these are nightmare headlines for the world's most dynamic entertainment capital that we are. And so again, this was something that the TA spent hours, days, weeks, years, even decades trying to stop, was this issue of long hauling. And you can see that 3,300 in citations. So it was not for a lack of citing drivers. You may be aware that in December of 2020, just pre-COVID, we instituted flat fares. This was a months-long process of workshopping with the industry, with the drivers union, with a lot of input from the public as to how do we once and for all eliminate long hauling. How do we create certainty? So these are the arguments for why we enacted flat fares from Las Vegas Airport to the Strip and back to Las Vegas Airport. So it provides taxi customers certainty. So there's a flat fare, they know it ahead of time, they're not going to pay more, and it doesn't matter in terms of which route they're going to take. It just gives transparency to the passenger. It reinforces the regulatory model because it creates uniform rates and it levels the playing field. And it does that because there was always an accusation that some operations were encouraging long hauling. And so you'd have this tremendous infighting. No, you're cheating. No, you're cheating. And it was bad. The dialogue was completely broken. And so by having flat fares and zones, it eliminates that, or it levels the playing field. But the result has been it's eliminated long hauling, and that has been proven over the past year. We've just seen that complaint disappear, and it was again the primary focus of every call into our dispatch, every call into our front office, every call was a complaint typically about long hauling. And then this allows drivers to use the most efficient route. And obviously it improves customer satisfaction if they don't feel like they're being cheated. And that's obviously a very important role for any regulatory agency. So again, here are the flat fare zones. Zone 3 up there at the top, Flamingo North to the Stratosphere, $27. And again, these are from the airport and from these zones to the airport. Tropicana North to Flamingo, $23. And then zone 1 is $19. So the blue area, the green area, and the pink area, those are all 1, 2, and 3. And those, and I'm going quickly. I could certainly come back if this is something you guys wanted to dive into. But it just gives you an idea of how we set these zones up to cover the Las Vegas Strip and do so in what we thought was the most equitable way. The way we arrived at this was through DT5 smart meter data, and I can't say enough about the folks at Captain, who is a vendor in this market that provided this data through the industry. And it was 100% transparent. So these were actual rates, these were real-time data, and we literally millions of trips that we reviewed to come up with these numbers. And so just quickly, 84% of the trips that originate at the airport go to the Las Vegas Strip. 41% of those routes used the tunnel. So going from the airport to the tunnel to the 215 to the 15. The problem with that is it's a longer route, and drivers knew this, and they were pumping, for lack of a better word, those fares up, and that's how you get long hauling. If the passenger doesn't say, take me on that route, well, the driver knows he's going to get a higher fare. 43% of those trips were more than $25, and 23% of those trips were more than $30. And again, this was data that was provided in real time in a complete transparent way, so that we were able to, with confidence, generate those zones and understand that we were being very fair and not overcharging the consumer. As part of this, over the last couple of years, we mandated smart meter adoption. So instead of your standard digital meter, what this has done is it's spurred investment by the 16 companies. It's driven competition, it's driven modernization. And so as part of it, they went out and they've spent a lot of money on ride-hailing apps. They've come together in centralized dispatch. I believe 85% of the industry is now on centralized dispatch. The smart meters will give GPS accuracy, so the customer is not being overcharged. It allows for audio and video communication. They've gone out and they've improved driver training. One facility has this incredible simulator that you're literally feeling like you're in a taxi cab, and training their drivers. And again, a lot of this, I think, in fairness, was driven by Uber and Lyft and the arrival of Uber and Lyft and rideshare. For taxis to move into a much more modern, customer-facing, operation. And ultimately, what we tried to do, and what the board has tried to do since I've been here, is really foster collaboration. For a long time, this was an industry that was just plagued by infighting. They didn't want to talk to each other. They didn't want to talk to the board. They certainly didn't want to talk to this agency. And what we've tried to do is break that down and provide an environment where people could come together and share their opinions and do so that in a way that moved us forward. So COVID-19, there's no doubt, as we're all aware, that the impact on tourism in this state has been tremendous. And again, the TA is 100% fee funded. We receive no general funds. We receive no highway funds. So we are funded by the licensees we regulate. And as those trips declined there on the fiscal year 2020, you can see in March, COVID hits. And the governor declares a state of emergency. And instead of doing, 1.2 million trips, we do 500,000, as mid-month. And then you see the COVID cliff, as I call it, impacting the rest of that year and then through this year. Because those trips have declined so precipitously, so too has our revenue. Our revenue has declined 67%. The TA is primarily funded through a 20-cent trip charge. So every time they turn on the meter, we're going to get 20 cents of it. But as those trips have plummeted, so too has our revenue. Just as a note, the Livery Operators Association, the LOA, is 85% of the industry, and they have been pushing this session to get a BDR that would increase the trip charge by 20 cents. And I want to be very clear about this. This would give the authority flexibility to charge up to 40 cents. And there would be a mechanism that we've discussed over many months as to how this would be implemented on a regulatory basis. But it is not an automatic increase. I want to be very clear about that it would give the authority to the board. And again, the board these are open meetings. These are public meetings. We meet typically once a month. They are attended by the drivers union. So there's a lot of input that goes into these types of decisions. But again, this is a push from the LOA, recognizing that in our dire straits, in terms of our revenue situation, they're willing to step in and help keep us funded, which I think is a large vote of confidence on their part. So again, just to remind you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, what I hope you think of with the Taxi Cab Authority is our three primary public safety functions. We're vetting every driver, we're inspecting every vehicle, and we're doing routine patrol of both the taxi industry and then targeted enforcement. And let me explain to you why that's important. Under NRS 706-88395, this covers the impounding of vehicles that are not authorized to operate in commercial service. And this is really important. I've highlighted this language. A vehicle used as a taxi cab, limousine, or other passenger vehicle in passenger service must, there's plain language, not even shall, must be impounded by the administrator if a certificate of public convenience and necessity has not been issued. So in transportation, in other regulatory fields, there's a CPCN. So every single limo, every bus, every shuttle, every car, whether it's a taxi, has to have a CPCN. And what this agency has found throughout the decades is there's, for lack of a better word, hustlers who are going to go out and they're going to use either personal vehicles or they're going to use fraudulent limos, fraudulent buses, and they are going to represent themselves as having a CPCN. With the advent of Uber and Lyft, a very real concern has been the ability to print Uber and Lyft stickers from home, put it in the windshield, and you have fraudulent trade dress. You look like an Uber and Lyft. And this committee might be aware of some national headlines that where this has led to disastrous results. People think they're getting in a bona fide Uber and Lyft, and it is absolutely the wrong vehicle with the wrong person. So again, we are out enforcing this. We are out investigating this. We get solicited. My officers can stand downtown and they can be on their phone, and you will have a car roll down its window and say, "Where are you going? I'll take you for, X amount of cash." So these are vehicles that are operating without a CPCN. These are illegal trips. And when we encounter it, we impound these vehicles. When we investigate it, you would not believe how brazen people are with business cards, with ads on Craigslist. And why does this matter? I think the first reaction might be, well, these are just people trying to offer rides. They may not know what they're doing is illegal. And let's dive into what we found. So these are just some highlights of what my officers have encountered. And again, these are highlights of over 150 or 160, I think, just in the last couple of years that I could pull. These are 10 impounds. And number one, it's a drug pipe, baseball bat, 8-inch fillet knife. Drugs were on the driver, a registered owner's person, likely a DUI at the time. So these are real cases. These are real pictures. And again, this is what my officers are finding. The driver was a convicted sex offender, lengthy criminal record, outstanding warrant. Driver had multiple baggies of cocaine. And again, these are different impounds, but I'm just giving you some terrible highlights here. Driver RO had a lengthy criminal record. Driver advertising to give Craigslist, saying that cash and sex was welcome as payment. The driver physically struggled with our officers, tried to flee, and then when we subdued him, tried to bribe my officers. The driver sent a picture of his genitals to the investigator and showed up to give the ride with his pants unbuttoned and belt unbuckled. Driver had an open alcoholic drink in the car and admitted he'd been drinking it. Heroin, methamphetamine, sex offenders. So the reason that we vet every driver is obviously we're only putting people on the road who should be on the road. These are all instances of people in Clark County, in Las Vegas, who are offering rides either on Craigslist or they're soliciting. And this is real stories of what we're encountering. I'll tell you, it's my belief that the number of times this is happening in this town every single night, it is staggering. This is a very opportunistic environment because we have large shows, we have large conventions, we have areas with large amounts of foot traffic. So you could go downtown and you wait for somebody standing around and you offer them a ride. Again, most, maybe some, I don't want to say most, a lot of these are innocuous from a standpoint of a criminal element. But the one thing to keep in mind, there is no insurance. So even if it is just an individual who's just hustling, if it is an individual who normally drives for Uber and Lyft, but they're off app, and we run into those, there is no commercial insurance. And oftentimes the personal insurance will be denied. And so if that vehicle is involved in an accident, almost no one is covered. And whether it's medical bills, whether it's damage to the vehicle. And this is why taxis have insurance. This is why Uber and Lyft drivers have insurance. And when they're on app, that insurance covers the vehicle. But in these instances where a personal vehicle is being used, and unless that person has a commercial policy, which the vast majority of time they're not going to have unless they are a taxi or unless they are a bona fide Uber and Lyft driver, what ends up happening is no one can recover. I do have a picture there with Metro. I want to note it's very important. Our partnership with local law enforcement, whether it's NHP, whether it's Metro, whether it's North Las Vegas, whether it's Henderson, they are absolutely outstanding at agency assists, and they come in and they will gladly take the drugs that we find and pursue those criminal charges. They will gladly take weapons off the street and pursue those criminal charges. So how do we deliver due process? Again, anytime we do an impound, it's adjudicated in front of an impartial administrative law judge. It's prosecuted by a deputy AG. Evidence is presented just like it would in a criminal trial. Witnesses, complainants, respondents can be cross-examined. The second step is if they want to appeal from that ALJ, the administrative law judge, they appeal it to the 5-member board of the taxi cab authority who hears that appeal. And then finally, there's always an opportunity for a petition for judicial review in district court. So just quickly, major accomplishments, Madam Chair. So our COVID-19 response, I cannot say enough about my folks and how proud I am of the team here. They are public servants who take pride in their job. They are passionate about their job. During the COVID lockdown and pandemic, taxis were deemed essential by the governor, and they were out operating every single day. And through this period to today, during this pandemic, during all of the challenges we've all had and mitigation we've all had to do, taxi drivers have been out there and they've done over 3 million trips. And obviously those trips include medical visits, grocery store visits, senior trips through Senior Ride especially, which is a program that this agency funds for senior citizens. We enacted emergency regulations, which required drivers to wear a mask. If they failed to wear a mask, we cited them. We also required that vehicles were wiped down and kept clean. We wrote 91 failure to wear a mask citations. And again, the last thing we want to do is cite a driver who is economically challenged during a pandemic. They were all hurting. But the only way that we could keep a bright line on safety was absolutely ensure that masks were being worn. It was non-negotiable. So those citations were written. The TA staff has been operational. We are not a work from home office. We just don't have the ability to do that. So my officers were on the road. My vehicle inspectors were on the road, and I thank them enough for being frontline. My enforcement staff volunteered through Clark County School District, was maintaining food delivery at their local sites. I'm incredibly proud of my staff who volunteered 332 hours of their time to be there and help logistics, help CCSD police the logistics on that. So that's been our COVID-19 response. Just major accomplishments overall. So the first ever flat fare zones, it eliminates long hauling and all of that national press and local press that was just terrible black eye on the industry and a black eye on this agency. And frankly, we found a way to come together and fix it. We've mandated 100% adoption of smart meters. We've now focused our enforcement efforts rather than just on this long hauling issue that was never ending, is now we're very focused on unlawful passenger transportation and this public safety risk that exists. And then again, like I've stressed, we've repaired the dialogue among the stakeholders, the agency and the board, interrelated, right? Which is we all have to have a voice as to how this industry is going to survive and thrive. So with that, Madam Chair, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, and members of the committee, thank you so much. I know you have so many issues in front of you. I do appreciate just your personal time and the sometimes thankless hours and days and months that you put in every session. Just as a personal note of privilege, I greatly appreciate your time and what you do on behalf of the state. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm absolutely available for any questions, and I will stop my screen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Whittemore, for the presentation. I know that we do have maybe a few, I know at least one question for you. Assemblyman Niagara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. It's good to see you, Mr. Whittemore, and thank you for your presentation. I just had a comment and then I guess a question that's related. One, I wanted to thank you for the work on the long hauling issue. As you'd indicated, that's been going on longer than probably any of us can remember at this point. And I had a friend who used to live on the Strip, and he would often fly back into town, and he would never reveal that he was a local. And he just had pretty wild stories about the different routes that would be taken to get to the same location every time. So the way I learned about the flat fare is he told me, hey, they changed things up at the airport and now it's just a flat fare. And so obviously, he was very happy with that solution of not having to essentially argue with the driver about which route was going to be taken. So thank you for that. And my question relates to that. It's just, have you had any feedback from visitors to Las Vegas or tourists about that flat fare system? Any complaints, or do people seem to like it? I would think it makes things pretty easy for everyone, but just was curious about feedback you or your agency might have received.
Thank you so much. And Madam Chair, may I go direct?
Yes.
Yeah, Scott Whittemore for the record. Assemblyman, thank you so much for the question. We've gotten overwhelmingly positive feedback from the airport, from the stakeholders, from the drivers themselves, and from the public. Obviously, we ran into what was a very challenged environment in early spring, right? So with COVID, but prior to that March kind of cliff that we ran into, the response was overwhelmingly positive, that people knew. And that's what a consumer wants, right? We're all very savvy. We're shopping online. We want to know what the price is before we click and purchase. It's the same thing with taxis. And that's what we stressed was, let's give consumers an absolute transparent map that the signage is up at the airport, up at McCarran. You can literally walk out of T1 and T3, and there is signage there that will tell you what the zones are. That signage is also in the vehicles. It's also on the smart meter displays in the back. So I think the overall, I am very comfortable saying, in the board meetings, just reporting back to what we've heard is just overwhelming support for those zones. In fact, people asking, how do we go further? How do we include downtown? How do we include the rest of the valley? And I think there's something to that, which is just providing people transparency and letting them decide, do I want to pay rideshare? Do I want to pay a taxi? And letting consumers weigh those things.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Very well done on that issue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Assemblyman Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. You talked about enforcement division and you go against unlicensed carriers and you do enforcement on licensed carriers. Just curious as to the balance of that enforcement. Can you estimate this percentage of time you spend on each of those?
It's a great question, sir. Thank you, Assemblyman. So this has only been recently that we've been able to eliminate long hauling. And as part of the COVID response, we had an emergency regulation for the masks. And this was crucial that we have every single person in the mask. Additionally, on the taxi side, we still have your standard citations for things like rotation violation, which means you're waiting in line for a very long time and somebody comes flying up and takes that spot. And so we have to watch that. We have to watch for safety issues. So I would say it like this, sir. I would hope that my staff is 50% focused on the regulated carriers and making sure that we're keeping an even level playing field, that taxi drivers don't have to slug it out, in between themselves, that there's an officer that can be there and keep an eye on that regulated space. The unlawful passenger transportation space, I could double my staff. And I know you hear this from law enforcement agencies, and I know, sir, with your background, and I thank you for your years of service on Metro. We could double our staff, and I truly believe we would not identify it all. There are so many illegal limos, illegal buses, illegal shuttles. And I just want to make a point. This is where we have concurrent jurisdiction with our sister agency, the NTA. And they are also focused on this area. One of the challenges you have, of course, is how do you identify them? Craigslist is easy. That's shooting fish in a barrel. Business cards that we find, that's shooting fish in a barrel. It is all of the events. It is all of the odd hours from midnight till 6 a.m. What's going on in the city at every establishment you can imagine where people are being solicited with cash rides. And for the most part, I think we don't hear about them because for the most part, there's not the criminal activity or a true crime that's committed, that's publicized. But the reality is we have people who are inebriated. We have people on, drugs is so common, and it's becoming more common. And so I apologize. That's a long way of answering. I would hope my staff and my directive with Chief Aquino and he and I think see eyeball to eyeball on this is how do we split our time is best as 50-50 and really pursue that unlawful passenger transportation.
Well, thank you very much for the answer. I really appreciate it. I know it's tough to get a balancing act. And I should know this, but are most of your citations civil infractions or the criminal infractions on both licensed and unlicensed folks?
Thank you, Assemblyman. Yeah, important question and important distinction. My officers are post-certified. They are Category 2. And for the other members of the committee, Category 2 are state regulatory officers by and large. Then you have Category 3, which is like NDOC. Category 1 are your first responders, so it's NHP and it's Metro. So my officers on a Category 2 basis have the ability to make arrests, and they have the ability. They wear bulletproof vests. They have a badge. They have a gun. It is a dangerous job, and the tough issue that we run into is when we find drugs and when we find weapons and when we find a criminal arrest, we do not have the staffing where we would pursue those. And frankly, we don't have the explicit authority to pursue those. Metro is a tremendous partner. Every time we call with a situation like this, they send a unit out and they are all too happy to get those weapons off the street and get the drugs off the street. The issue that we would run into is one of time, and appearing in justice court or district court on criminal charges would really break the bank in terms of our ability to put officers on the road and then overtime. So it is not to say that we don't have the actual jurisdiction as Category 2 officers, but it isn't our lane. And I think what we've tried to do here and within other state Category 2 is make sure we're staying in our law enforcement lane as a regulatory agency. Right. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions. Appreciate what you do.
Thank you. Members, any more questions? Well, it looks like Mr. Whittemore, you're going to get off easy today. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's really good to see you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As always, Scott Whittemore for the record. Thank you so much, committee.
Have a wonderful day. Members, that brings us up to our last presentation for the day. We will have members from the Western States Petroleum Association joining us. And I believe they are in our waiting room. There they are. All right, ladies, the floor is yours. You can go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's nice to see some familiar faces. So good afternoon, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. We will try to be brief and to the point on this, and I will introduce also my colleague, Argelia Leon, who is also on the line. As mentioned, my name is Margot Parks, and I work for the Western States Petroleum Association. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so I am based in California, but do government affairs in California, Arizona, and Nevada. So it's a pleasure to be here to present to you today. A little bit about our association in the country representing oil and gas interests. We have been around.
Excuse me, this is Judy from Broadcast. The audio is not coming across well at all. There seems to be some interference. Might I suggest that you eliminate your virtual background first and see if that stops the hiss? Pardon me, Madam Chair, I didn't mean to step on you.
That's quite all right, Judy.
Thanks, Judy. I appreciate it. Actually, yeah, I don't know what that is. Hold on. Let's see here. Okay. No, that doesn't seem to work, does it?
Can you stop your screen share and try it again? And before you do the screen share, you did check share computer audio at the bottom of the sharing screen.
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to give it a try again, please.
Yeah, don't know what that is. If I stop my video, Judy, can I still make the presentation, share my screen?
If you try to take it out of full screen mode and see what happens if it will play in slide sorter mode without that hiss. So you have your so if you start on slide 1,
Okay.
I think that might work. You can increase the size of your slides there. There's a slider bar at the bottom. See if you can make that bigger and okay. And you can hide your notes
Okay.
and make it just a little bit smaller, and then we'll see if that will play. We can try that.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sorry for the background interference. I don't know what that is. So my sincere apologies. Beauty of working from home, I suppose. So just someone wave at me if for some reason you're having trouble hearing me. So as I was mentioning, thank you, Judy, for your support. As I was mentioning, well, WISPA represents companies in the oil and gas industry. We've been around since 1907. We represent what we talk about as the three streams of the business. There's the upstream side of the business, which is the pulling the oil out of the ground part. We represent the midstream side of the business, which is transportation and pipeline. And finally, we represent the downstream side of the business, which is the refining, transportation, and retail side of things. About our association specifically, as I mentioned, we are based in California. We represent 5 Western states, California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Arizona, and have a variety of interests in all of those states. The association we're proud to announce is 2/3 women, led by a 30-year veteran of our association, our president, Cassidy Boyd. So we're very proud of who we are as an association and the members that we represent. I think as was mentioned by the previous speaker, acknowledging the importance of essential workers, especially during COVID, we have been fortunate in that our workforce, for the most part, has been able to continue to work because they have been designated as essential workers. And so, these are the people who are refining and producing fuels that are helping produce the plastics that go into syringes for medical purposes, and help with goods movement of getting everyone's Amazon packages delivered to them while they're stuck at home. So critical to the infrastructure and keeping the economy rolling. Like a lot of industries, we have certainly seen our fair share of challenges during this time. For the most part, our companies have had to lay off somewhere around 15% of their workforce, which has certainly been a challenge, but we're looking forward to economies opening back up and getting our folks back to work. I'm sorry about that hissing. So just a little bit of background and perspective about our industry's role in Nevada's economy. We support approximately 29,000 direct and indirect jobs within the state. So when we say direct and indirect, we mean people who are directly employed in the oil and gas industry, and those who are contractors or otherwise service providers to the industry. So that's about 1 in every 59 private sector jobs. So even though there's not a lot of refining or production in Nevada, there is a large footprint. In terms of tax revenue contributions, annually it's about $8.4 million. And that's via any of the business ownerships that are in the state and the wages paid there. And then the total economic contributions are about $8 billion. That's the economic output. And I will turn it over, hopefully, to my colleague, Arhelia, who will hopefully have better luck with her audio to talk about this next slide and the average industrial wage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. Argelia Leon with the Western States Petroleum Association. I manage strategic partnerships for the association throughout our 5 Western states. This slide here goes into the average industry annual wage within our oil workers, whether they're refinery operators, extraction workers, construction managers. The average annual wage for oil and gas industry is about starting at $80,500 a year. This includes benefits as well as retirement. So for a lot of these folks, especially in states like California, where there's a lot of production, we like to talk about, the pathway to the middle class. These jobs are able to provide a lot of the workers with an opportunity to move into the middle class, workers from low-income backgrounds, or even folks that don't have a college education, that might not even have a high school degree sometimes. We are also proud to share the fact that a lot of our guys out in the rigs and out working in the petroleum industry in California are some of the folks that have been formerly incarcerated. So we do an oil worker day here in California where we bring out a lot of these workers, and we love them to share their stories with the legislature on what it is about the oil industry that they appreciate, and it always comes down to the wages. A lot of these guys couldn't get these types of wages in any other industry. So that's one thing that we really like to highlight. We are actually working on a fact sheet for Nevada. We did this presentation earlier this week to another one of the caucuses, and we will insert some data pertinent to the jobs in Nevada and the economic ripple effect there. Most of the jobs in Nevada, as you know, there is really no production or refining center around the retail space, and we will share that information with this group as soon as it's available. We also like to share this video of some of the petroleum engineers.
Well, my name is Albino Guatemala. I'm from a small town called Santa Maria, California. It's in Santa Barbara County. And, it's not a place where college graduates go and like, oh, I want to work in Santa Maria. What people mostly think of when they live in Santa Maria is I want to get out of Santa Maria. Somebody may ask like, oh, what are your kids up to? Like, oh, ¿qué hacen tus hijos? Like, van a la escuela? And my parents are like, yeah, like mi hijo va a la UCLA. As a little kid, the reason why I got into engineering was because I always asked why, how, those questions, those type of questions, how things work. The only way to grow as a person is to learn new things every day, to be open-minded, to never think of yourself better than others. Let your passion drive you. Let your knowledge drive you. That's what I want to do. You get me? I want to, bring change. I want to bring a different perspective. Not only do I want to succeed in my industry, but I want to help my community as well. I'm studying engineering at UCLA, and my emphasis is on petroleum and the oil and gas industry.
So that was just a little snippet of some of the, petroleum engineers, young petroleum engineers. We've had a conversation about how, to recruit more young workforce into the oil and gas industry. Here, I'd like to just give a broad overview of what we do in Nevada. I've been working in Nevada since 2018 with the Western States Petroleum Association, looking to build partnerships and relationships. Some of the highlights here in 2020, we partnered with the Nevada Hispanic Legislative Caucus, a task force they put together to provide grocery deliveries to folks that were COVID positive in Nevada. We also supported the Nevada Black Legislative Caucus with a similar task force that provided gift cards to purchase PPP equipment for a senior living facility in Nevada. We've partnered with the Latin Chamber of Commerce to do a lot of education, as well as Southwest Gas in terms of the energy mix and the importance of energy in the state of Nevada. We've shared a link to the video, which is on YouTube, and you can learn a little more about how that conversation went. Additionally, we also do a lot of charitable giving in the state. We worked with Ebenezer Helping Hands. It's a charitable organization in Southern Nevada. We've worked with Pastor Leonard Foreman there. as well as our continued partnership with the Nevada League of Cities. We were a premier sponsor of the 2020 annual conference, and we are also members of the Nevada Association of Counties. Just a quick highlight, but we do try to partner with business groups. I think our motto here at WISPA is that we want to be a resource. We understand that the association is not well known in Nevada. We are more well known, I think, in states like California and Washington. But our goal is really to build that bridge between the communities we serve, as well as be a resource, not just for external audiences, but also for the legislature. So if there's any information having to do with any one of our industry areas, we're more than happy to provide data that can help you inform yourself on what it is the industry does and provides to the communities we serve. Thank you, Margot. I think you're up next.
Thanks, Arhelia. So, as Arhelia mentioned, our partnerships and our communities in which we operate are extraordinarily important for us. It's important for us to be good stewards, to be good members of the community, and to provide ample opportunity for those who are seeking to better their economic situation, to find employment in a field that gives opportunity where a lot of other industries don't. And just to provide some additional context and perspective about sort of the size and scope of the industry in the state. Annually in Nevada, consumers use approximately 50 million gallons of jet, and that is gasoline. About 60% is gasoline, as you might imagine. That gasoline is delivered to all the various outlets via 3 major terminals in the state of Nevada. As has been mentioned, there's not a lot of production or refining in Nevada, and so most of the transportation fuels that are brought into the state are brought in via 3 terminals, one in Reno, one in Sparks, and one in Las Vegas. And then 500 miles of pipeline to the various outlets, both retail and industrial. And all of those numbers go to support the 28 billion miles a year that Nevadans drive, which is not insignificant. And so I think it's really important as we're thinking through a variety of climate policies that we're trying to figure out, how do we take that 28 billion number and ensure that our climate policies moving forward are equitable for those who have to drive long distances, who might be super commuters. How can we ensure that they have transportation that's affordable and reliable and gets them where they need to go? So we're focused on that in a big way. And we, again, I'm sorry about that background noise. But our industry is really committed and dedicated to innovation in the tech space and in the new fuel space. So for 100 years, the industry has been innovating and investing money into a variety of energy sources and continue to do that. So just wanted to highlight a few of those for you here today. Biofuels being one, a lower carbon source of fuels that is derived from a variety of feedstocks. Our companies make millions of gallons of these biofuels that can be used as a replacement fuel, as well as renewable diesel. So different and sometimes similar feedstocks that go in for heavy duty. So all of those trucks that are going in and out to Las Vegas can be made cleaner by using different types of fuel. And we're looking into ways to reduce that carbon intensity wherever we can. Fuel cell technology is huge. Our companies are heavily invested in fuel cell technology, both on the light duty side for passenger vehicles, as well as the heavy duty side. So we're talking hydrogen there, right? A zero emission fuel that is possible to put in your car, doesn't have necessarily the same challenges of kind of the grid infrastructure that electric vehicles do, but our companies are heavily invested there as well. They're on the charging side big time. So, a whole host of technologies that our companies are invested in and interested in moving the ball forward on. And I think finally, it's worth mentioning that, as we talk through climate policies, we know that there are going to be a lot of places where it's hard to get carbon out of the atmosphere. There's a lot of technology that has to be developed. And so our companies are very much in this space of carbon capture sequestration of literally sucking carbon out of the air and either reusing it for a different purpose or storing it underground so that it's removed from the atmosphere. So we're involved in projects all over the world, which is really exciting. So we're excited to be a collaborative part of meeting the climate challenge, which we recognize is very much real. It's here today, and we want to be part of that solution. So I think, again, as we're thinking through the various challenges that we have before us and how to meet our goals, we're really evaluating these policies through really 6 different lenses that I'll touch on very briefly here. Access to energy matters, right? Being able, as I think the first speaker mentioned, being able to get in your car and go where you need to go matters. Being able to turn on your lights, heat, and cool your home is important, right? These are basics to our everyday life that we need to make sure we're able to continue to do and do it in a way that's affordable and equitable. The 4 E's, they must be all part of the solution. So when we talk about the 4 E's, we're talking about energy, we're talking about equity, we're talking about environment, and we're talking about the economy. How do we establish policies that balance all of those? Public transparency and broad stakeholder participation is super important in developing any type of climate policy that is going to be sustainable. You need to have broad stakeholder buy-in. And those stakeholders all need to be informed by this next policy principle, which is scientific and economic analysis, is making sure everyone has access to the information, that we're doing our job of looking critically at this information and data and figuring out how to put it together in the best policy possible. Fifth, technology and fuel neutrality, right? We have no idea what the future is going to hold in terms of technology. There's a lot of great hopes with battery storage technology, with hydrogen, with electric vehicles. And I think it's important that as we're looking at where we want to go, that we're leaving the door open for all of these technologies to play a critical role in reducing our CO2 levels. And then finally, market-based approaches. We have found that across the globe that market-based approaches are the most affordable for consumers and find the quickest and most cost-effective ways to reduce carbon. So as you're going through the heavy lifting job of thinking through all of these policies and where Nevada is going to go tomorrow, we ask that you keep these in mind. So just in conclusion, we just want to leave you with a couple of last minute thoughts here is that, our industry is here to partner and collaborate with you. We have some of the best and brightest minds in the world on some of these issues. We are here to be a partner in your community and provide high wage jobs, support our community through philanthropic efforts, and to be a partner with you in planning for a sustainable future. So I will leave you with a quote from our president, who really is always talking about how the future of energy is at a tipping point and that we all must come together if we're going to plan for what's next and create policies that are sustainable and equitable. So I will stop there and turn it back over to the chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. Great presentation, even with the audio issues.
My apologies. And I'm going to turn my screen off so you all don't have to look at my closet behind me.
No need to apologize. That's the times that we're living through. Assemblyman Niagara does have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Parks and Ms. Leon. It's good to see you guys again, and thanks for persisting through those difficulties. We're finding our way through this virtual world as well, so we certainly understand the frustration at times. I appreciate the presentation, and particularly the end of the presentation when you talked about the environment and climate. I think obviously that's a discussion at the forefront of everything we're doing here in the legislature. I'm curious about whether there are fuels or technologies that are from petroleum sources that are zero carbon emissions. I know there were some that were low carbon, but I'm curious if there's anything out there that's zero carbon, and if so, what they would be and whether they're economically viable at this time.
So I don't know the answer to that question. What I can say is that there is a way to produce fuels, petroleum-based fuels, in a way that is carbon negative. That does not absolve them of the emissions, obviously, that are born from them being transportation emissions once they go into a vehicle. But our companies are looking at a lot of different fuel types. One I failed to mention, algae is one that ExxonMobil, you may have seen a commercial for, not a petroleum-based fuel certainly, but another technology that they're looking at. So I think, all of our companies are doing the best they can to figure out how can we make transportation, petroleum fuels as clean as they possibly can be? And, you know, if that doesn't cut it, what other technologies are available to meet that goal?
Thank you so much for that. And I would just ask, you know, you're probably going to hear about technologies quicker than we will. So if you do hear about emerging technologies, if you wouldn't mind passing that on to the chair or vice chair, just to be able to share with us, would really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I was sitting in solidarity, remembering sitting in my Zoom space at home and my kids running in and out of my meetings. So I appreciate, I'm sitting in solidarity with you with tech issues. But my question comes from some of my personal background, having worked in the engineering industry and arena of engineering. And I'm wondering, I have not been in that field for a little while, how much petroleum are we currently producing in Nevada? If you could provide quantities for that. And is there any refining that occurs of that petroleum? And is it refined in Nevada?
Yes, Madam Chair, if I might respond. Margot Parks with Western States Petroleum, for the record. Sorry, I'm getting used to this process. Assembly Member Peters, I don't have the exact number for you. I believe that there is a small amount of both production and refining in the state. I have those numbers, just not in front of me. I'm happy to get back to you on those. But I think it's very, very limited. I think those resources just don't really exist in Nevada. And so a majority of the transportation fuels are, if not, you know, upwards of 90% are imported.
All right. Yeah, that was my memory as well. But I was just wondering if there had been changes in the last 5 to 7 years. And then, Madam Chair, I have another question that's a separate issue, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One of my passions around petroleum is the ability to make high-grade medical products. I think that is one of the places where we really cannot get away from the petroleum industry. And I'm just wondering, from your association's perspective, how much that industry matters for the Western states and how much we participate in the development of those really specific and important materials.
Absolutely. And again, Margot Parks, Western States Petroleum, for the record. So the petrochemical industry largely in the United States does produce the feedstocks that go into a lot of these high-grade medical equipment, as you mentioned. I believe that there are a couple of petrochemical plants in the 5 Western states that we represent, but it is a relatively small number compared to, I think, more like the East Coast ish area that does provide the majority of those feedstocks.
Thank you.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have a question, and then I have I think based on what's been provided so far, just kind of a request for follow-up information. So, you know, I appreciate that you've provided some additional information since the last time I saw this presentation on breakdown of the jobs and pay. And based on my colleague, Assemblywoman Peters' question, it sounds like some of those jobs in production and refining are very limited here. So just kind of reiterating, it'd be great to see what the jobs are that are located here in the state and what the pay, average pay is for those. You know, in addition, I think I'd like to see some more information on the investments that your association in the petroleum industry is making in biofuels and fuel cells and electric vehicle charging and these other carbon reduction technologies. And, you know, if there's a commitment to a certain percentage of revenue that's being invested into that forward-thinking approach, and again, are there projects that are being undertaken by your members here in the state of Nevada? The question that I have is, as you know, we 2 years ago set policy priority to try and get our state to net zero emissions by the year 2050. And I was just wondering how you envision, how your association envisions meeting those goals over the coming decades.
Yeah, so a lot of questions there, I think, but we will certainly follow up with some of the questions that you had specifically on jobs. I will just note that while the majority of jobs in the state are more on the downstream side, there are a substantial number that are on the midstream pipeline side, and those average wages are approximately $100,000 a year, but we can get you a more detailed breakdown, certainly. In answer to your question about the level of commitment, so you'll note, I don't know if you can see on the presentation at the moment, but we do have, if you click on the top of the presentation where it says collaborating to meet today's climate challenges, you can get more information about the variety of projects and investments that our companies are making. If you would like additional information beyond that, we can certainly get you those numbers. You know, each company is different in terms of how they're looking at their investments, but overall, I think you'll find that our industry collectively is investing on the scale of billions of dollars into these variety of technologies. And as far as the question about the projects that we have in Nevada, I'm going to have to get back to you. I know that we do have companies who are very interested and perhaps have electric vehicle charging station businesses in your state. But we're going to have to get back to you on that because our members don't refine or produce in the state. We don't have those types of facilities to do those low carbon fuels and alternative fuels. But we may have some other projects that we can certainly get back to you with.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. It's helpful to get some state-specific context on these issues. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
Thank you. Members, any other questions for the presenters? Any other questions? I'd like to say thank you for the presentation, but even more than that, thank you for stepping up as a community partner to help us address the needs, the many needs as we making it through this COVID-19 pandemic. It's going to take all of us working together to get through this. So thank you for being a partner in that. So wishing you both a wonderful day and committee. That brings us to the last item on our agenda for today, and that is public comment. So as I stated at the beginning of our meeting, public comment would be at the end, and I believe we have 1 or 2 people in the waiting room for public comment. So if our staff could let them in, that would be wonderful.
To offer public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Will the caller with the last 3 digits 101, please press *6 to unmute. Slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes. You may begin. Chair, the caller is not responding.
And the caller's been in the waiting room for a while.
Yes, the caller has been in the waiting room since the beginning, but has not raised his or her hand to take his place in the queue.
All right, perhaps they were just listening and following along with the committee meeting for the day. So members, our next meeting for the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure will be on Tuesday, February 23rd at 1:30 p.m., where we'll enjoy presentations from Nevada's energy sectors and automobile associations. So with that concludes this meeting, and our meeting is adjourned. Have a wonderful day.